Chapter 8. Within an hour after I had been shot down on Friday, a badly shaken Bob Wilbur Wright, my flight leader, had returned to Aviano with grim news for everyone in the Triple Nickel. After watching my plane get blown apart by a missile, he had neither seen a parachute in the sky nor heard any radio message from the ground. He had made several CAPS combat air patrols above the immediate area, following our SAR plan, before reluctantly assuming the worst. At Aviano, pilots and wives listened to the grim news but somehow hoped that I had pulled off the impossible and survived. On Sunday, when the Bosnian Serbs claimed that they had captured me, among all the pilots at Aviano, no one wanted to believe that message more than Wilbur. And after Wilbur came Captain Tom T.O. Hanford, the weapons and tactics officer of the Triple Nickel. Hanford had been flying F-16s for 7 years and had lost a number of pilot friends in air accidents. To make the record worse for him, I would have been the first lost in a combat situation. When the Bosnian Serbs later admitted that they had not captured me, Hanford feared that I had died as a prisoner of war and the Serbs were simply afraid to tell the world the truth. There was only the slimmest chance, Hanford now believed, that I was alive and on the run. The only way to know for sure was to keep looking for me. Search and rescue planes went out in pairs every day from Aviano and did the usual sorties of F-16s as part of the Operation Deny Flight. Everyone was fearful of the SAM batteries and had shot down my plane. If the Serbs could get me, the SAMs could get them too. Pilots were ordered to fly their missions feet wet along the coastline, which was out of the missile's range. Better there than in the no-fly zone where I'd been hit. But from Aviano and other NATO bases in Italy, secret packages were in fact flying feet dry over Bosnia searching for me. Packages meant a fleet of maybe 6 planes at one time, which had plenty of firepower to knock out any SAMs if necessary. Feet dry meant flying over land as opposed to feet wet, which is flying over water. Even if I didn't know it, Flashman had been part of one of those secret packages. He and all the search and rescue teams had their radios continually turned to guard or alpha. They repeatedly called out to me and waited for some signal in return. There had been little to make them hopeful. Several beacon signals had been picked up in the countryside since Friday afternoon. However, the signals were judged by Magic, the NATO Airborne Command Post, to be too far from my crash site to belong to me. Late Wednesday night, June 7th, Hanford and his wingman, Captain Clark Higstreet, were on a deny flight sortie north of their normal route and only 75 miles from my crash site. For 2 hours, starting around 11 p.m., Hanford had trained his radar on a no-fly zone looking for bad guys. Nothing showed up. By 1:25 a.m. Thursday morning, their sortie was over. Hanford and Higstreet were cleared by Magic to return to Aviano. Hanford wasn't really looking for me. That was the job of the search and rescue pilots. But with nothing else going on, he asked Magic if he could stay in the skies a little longer. He had enough fuel for an extra 40 minutes of flying, he said, and just maybe he would get lucky and find me. Magic gave his permission to fly an additional 20 minutes. While Higstreet monitored Magic's frequency, Hanford turned the radio to Alpha Search and Rescue Channel. "This is Basher 1-1," he called, still in racetrack pattern off the coast of Croatia. "Looking for Basher 5-2." There was no answer. Patiently, he kept trying. Around 1:40 a.m., something strange came over his headset. Having switched briefly to the guard channel, Hanford heard an irregular static pattern that sounded as if it could be a very faint beacon. Hanford was interrupted by his wingman on their inter-flight radio. Their 20 minutes was up, Higstreet said, and Magic wanted them to return to Aviano. Knowing he still had extra fuel, Hanford asked Magic for permission to stay out longer. He had heard something on guard, he told them. With Magic's okay, Hanford went back to monitoring. The normal pattern of static returned. Disappointed, he moved his radio frequency to Alpha. "Basher 5-2, this is Basher 1-1 on Alpha." Hanford kept calling, circling over the coastline, peering into the distant lights of Bosnia. Things looked peaceful from his darkened cockpit. He tried to imagine where I might be hiding, what my thoughts were, how I was attempting to communicate. Minutes later, High Street interrupted again. Magic was worried. It knew both pilots were low on fuel and wanted them back at the base now. In a stern voice, Hanford told Magic he was well aware of his fuel level, but he wanted more time. A fellow pilot was down there somewhere, and Hanford said he was going to keep looking until the last possible moment. Nervously, Magic backed off. Still in racetrack pattern, Hanford repeated his call sign on Alpha. Basher 5-2, this is Basher 5-1 on Alpha. His eyes kept dancing to his fuel gauge. In another minute he would have to turn back to Aviano. The worst thing he could do was run his wingman High Street out of fuel. As Hanford listened intently through his headset, and the faintest voices suddenly broke through the haze of static. Basher 1-1, Basher 5-2. The voice sounded weak and tired. Hanford didn't want to jump to conclusions. This is Basher 1-1, he said, speaking slowly. I can barely hear you. Say your call sign. Basher 1-1, Basher 5-2. Again, the voice was almost too faint to be heard. Hanford was unsure. Understand you are Basher 5-2, he said. This is Basher 1-1 on Alpha. The low fuel warning sounded on Hanford's onboard computer. He ignored the warning, pushing his F-16 further east to improve his radio reception. He was suddenly flying over the interior of Croatia, coming close to the range known as Sam Batteries. Now High Street had to urge his flight leader to return to Aviano. Basher 5-2, this is Basher 5-1. Say again. Hanford said into his radio, ignoring High Street for the moment. Then Hanford heard it, as clear as a church bell. He almost jumped out of his skin. This is Basher 5-2. Read you loud and clear. Basher 1-1 has you loud and clear, Hanford roared back. His plane briefly circled west out of range, and when he turned east again, the voice on the ground returned even stronger. This is Basher 5-2. How do you hear? Basher 5-2, Hanford bellowed. This is Basher 1-1. I'm alive! I'm alive! Copy that, Hanford said joyfully. Tears were welling up and his voice was cracking. There was just one small doubt he had to overcome. Hanford had to be sure this was no Serb trick, no ambush to bring him into Sam range. What was your squadron in Korea? Hanford asked. We were good enough friends for him to know the answer. Juvats, Juvats, copy that, you're alive. It was 2:08 a.m. Hanford was so shaken that he'd forgotten standard radio procedures. He also didn't identify who he was, and I didn't ask. Basher 1-1 wrote down the code I gave him for my coordinates. This was our same special code that Wilbur and I agreed on our pre-flight briefing. Basher 1-1 told me to turn off my radio and save my batteries. Using a special alpha frequency, we agreed to communicate again in a half an hour. As his F-16 turned away out of monitoring range, he and High Street dashed back over the Adriatic on what fumes he had left in their gas tanks. They would refuel at the airborne tanker and return to me as quickly as possible. Hanford's thoughts jumped ahead to the next step. He had to get my coordinates relayed to NATO, and he was also feeling the joy of the moment. He knew there were going to be a lot of happy folks back home.